When Commander Nash stood in my driveway demanding to know my military service record, like it was some kind of joke, I watched his smirk fade the second I said, "Silver sky." The color drained from his face faster than I'd ever seen on a cocky officer. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning. I bought the small ranch house on Maple Court in March 2023 because it was quiet, affordable, and had a garage big enough for my woodworking projects. After 30 years of noise, I craved peace. The neighbors seemed friendly enough, mostly retirees and young families. I kept to myself, maintained my property, and figured I'd finally found a place to disappear into a quiet retirement. The HOA president, Richard Nash, introduced himself the second week. Tall guy, mid-40s, with that particular swagger that comes from a military career. He mentioned within the first 3 minutes that he was a retired Navy commander, ran the neighborhood watch, and kept things shipshape around here. I nodded politely and mentioned I'd served too, years ago. He barely acknowledged it before launching into HOA rules about trash bins and lawn height. For the first 2 months, everything was fine. I worked in my garage, kept my grass trimmed to exactly 2.5 inches, and put my trash bins out Tuesday nights like clockwork. Then I made the mistake of parking my 1987 Chevy K5 Blazer in my driveway. It was a Saturday morning, June 10th, when Nash knocked on my door. "That vehicle," he said, pointing at my Blazer, "violates our aesthetic standards. Commercial and oversized vehicles must be garaged or removed." "It's a personal vehicle," I replied calmly. "Stock configuration, registered as a personal truck. I checked the CC&Rs, nothing prohibits it." His jaw tightened. "I'm telling you it violates our standards. Garage it, or I'll have it towed." I'd dealt with bigger bullies in places where the stakes were considerably higher than a suburban driveway. "I'll review the bylaws again," I said, closing the door. 3 days later, I received a formal violation notice. $250 fine for unauthorized vehicle display, escalating to $500 per day if not resolved within 72 hours. I read it twice, then pulled out my copy of the HOA documents. Nothing, absolutely nothing about vehicle restrictions beyond inoperable or commercial vehicles. My Blazer was neither. I sent a certified letter explaining this, with highlighted copies of the relevant sections. Nash's response arrived within a week. "Your interpretation is incorrect. As HOA president and a former military officer, I know about following orders. Comply or face consequences." The next Tuesday, he started taking photos of my property. I watched through my window as he walked the perimeter, snapping pictures of my fence, my mailbox, even my garage door. When I stepped outside, he didn't even look embarrassed. "Just documenting violations," he said casually. "You're on my property," I reminded him. He laughed. "HOA has access rights for compliance checks. Read your bylaws, old man, old man." I let that one slide. 2 weeks later, the fines started multiplying. I received notices for excessive garage noise during permitted hours, unapproved paint color on a fence that hadn't been repainted in 5 years, and my personal favorite, failure to display holiday decorations in keeping with neighborhood standards. The total came to $3,200. I documented everything, photographed every notice, kept every envelope, recorded the dates and times of his property walkthroughs. My Ring camera caught him peering into my garage windows on July 18th at 2:43 p.m. When I politely asked him to stop, he smiled and said, "I have authority here. You're just a renter who doesn't understand how communities work." "I own this property," I corrected him. "For now," he replied. That's when I should have known he wouldn't stop there. On August 2nd, I returned from the hardware store to find my Blazer gone. Just gone. The tow truck driver had left tire marks in my gravel driveway. I called the towing company, Baxter's Auto Recovery, and they said the HOA president had authorized the tow from HOA property. That's my private driveway, I explained. Take it up with your HOA, sir. Tow fee is $425, plus $85 per day storage. I paid the $510 to get my truck back. Then I made copies of every receipt, every photo, every violation notice. I also pulled the original HOA plat maps from the county recorder's office. Interesting reading. Nash stopped by that evening, actually grinning. Hope you learned your lesson about following community rules. I need to talk to you about those rules, I said calmly. Nothing to discuss. You follow them or face additional fines. I've already drafted a lien notice for your outstanding violations, $3,200 plus the administrative costs. That's $4,100 total. A lien, I repeated, gets filed Friday unless you pay in full. Then we can discuss your continued residency here. He leaned in slightly. Between you and me, veteran to veteran, you should probably just sell. This neighborhood has standards you clearly can't meet. What branch did you serve? I asked. Navy. 22 years, retired commander. I ran a SEAL team for 6 years. He said it like he expected me to be impressed. You? Air Force, I said simply. He actually laughed. Chair Force. That explains it. Anyway, lien gets filed Friday at 9 a.m. unless you pay. Have a good evening. But that wasn't the worst part. The next morning, I found he'd filed the lien anyway, 2 days early. I saw it online Thursday night, a $4,100 mechanics lien against my property, filed by Richard Nash on behalf of the Maple Court HOA, claiming unpaid assessments and violation fees. That's when I made a phone call he didn't expect. Friday morning, I requested an emergency HOA board meeting. Nash tried to refuse, but the bylaws I'd memorized clearly stated any homeowner could call one with 48 hours' notice. We met Monday evening in the community clubhouse. Nash, 3 board members, and about a dozen curious neighbors. Nash opened with a smirk. Mr. Peterson has requested this meeting to dispute legitimate HOA fines. I've prepared documentation of his numerous violations. Actually, I interrupted calmly, I'm here to discuss illegally filed liens, fraudulent towing authorizations, and harassment. His smile didn't waver. These are serious accusations from someone who can't even follow simple community rules. I pulled out my briefcase. Let's start with the vehicle towing. You authorized Baxter's to remove my truck from my private driveway, claiming HOA authority. Oversized vehicle violation, he countered. Here's the section on vehicles. I distributed copies to the board. No restrictions on vehicle size, only condition. My truck is fully operational and legally registered. One board member, Carol, frowned. Richard, this doesn't say anything about I interpreted it within my authority. Nash cut in. Next, I continued, you filed a lien for $4,100 in violations. Here's the issue. This HOA has no legal standing to issue fines. The room went quiet. I pulled out the plat maps. This subdivision was never properly established as a mandatory HOA. The developer filed it as a voluntary neighborhood association in 1994. You have no enforcement authority whatsoever. Every fine you've issued to every resident for the past 6 years is legally void. Carol grabbed the documents. Is this true? He's misreading, Nash started. I had the county attorney's office confirm it Tuesday, I said, sliding over the official letter. The association can request voluntary compliance, but has zero authority to fine, lien, or enforce violations. Mr. Nash has been operating outside any legal authority since he became president. Nash's face flushed red. You're some retired Air Force, nobody trying to… Actually, I said quietly, let's talk about military service. You asked about mine. What does that? You mentioned running a SEAL team. Asked about my background. Made several comments about military hierarchy and following orders. I pulled out one more document. I was curious, so I submitted a FOIA request for your service record. His face went from red to white. Richard Nash, service, 1998-2020, 22 years. Honorable discharge, final rank, Lieutenant Commander, not full commander. Logistics specialist, never SEAL qualified. You attended Bud S in 2003 and washed out during Hell Week. I looked at him directly. You've been telling everyone you ran SEAL teams for 6 years. That's stolen valor, Richard. The room was dead silent. You asked what I did, I continued. Call sign was Silver Sky. Air Force Pararescue. 1982 to 2012, I was a PJ for 30 years. The guys who pulled SEALs out when things went bad. I pulled out my DD-2114. Also spent 8 years as a survival school instructor at Fairchild AFB, where I taught actual SEALs how to evade and survive. Nash's hands were shaking. He tried to speak, stammered, then tried again. There's been a misunderstanding about my role. There's been fraud, I corrected. You've collected over $47,000 in fake fines from residents in this neighborhood over 6 years, filed illegal liens against 4 properties, and misrepresented your military service to establish false authority. Carol stood up. I move for an immediate vote to remove Richard Nash as HOA president. Second, said another board member instantly. The vote was 3-0. Nash didn't even stay for the count. He grabbed his papers and left, the door slamming behind him. I submitted all my documentation to the county attorney's office the next day. They filed charges: fraud, theft by deception, and 3 counts of filing false liens. The stolen valor wasn't technically illegal under current law, but the local VFW made sure every veteran in a 20-mile radius knew about it. Nash settled out of court 6 weeks later. Full restitution of $47,000 to affected homeowners, plus my $510 towing fees. He moved out of the neighborhood by October. Last I heard, he's working at a used car dealership 2 counties over. The HOA board formally dissolved the voluntary association in September. We still have a neighborhood watch, but it's actually voluntary now. Carol runs it. She doesn't ask about call signs. My Blazer's parked in the driveway where it belongs, and I haven't received a fake violation notice in 8 months. Turns out, Silver Sky still carries some weight, even in the suburbs.